They laughed at her scars, whispering cruel words as she poured their coffee, unaware of the courage etched into her skin, until a veteran froze, his eyes locked on the faded unit tattoo that told a story they could never imagine. Her name was Aisha Thompson, and she carried the weight of her past quietly, her face and arms marked by scars that drew stares and hushed comments from the patrons at Mel's roadside diner in West Texas. At 35, Aisha moved with a steady grace, her dark eyes focused on her work, ignoring the whispers that followed her through the diner's worn booths and chipped countertops. She had been a waitress here for 3 years, serving truckers, locals, and the occasional drifter who passed through the dusty stretch of Highway 20. The scars, jagged and uneven across her cheek and forearms, were impossible to hide. They were the remnants of a life most couldn't fathom, and though she never spoke of them, they were a map of her survival. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the air thick with the heat of late summer, when a group of young men in their early 20s settled into a booth near the window. Their laughter was loud, their voices carrying over the hum of the old jukebox playing Merle Haggard. Aisha approached with her notepad, her apron stained from a morning rush, and offered a polite smile. "What can I get started for you all?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. One of the men, his baseball cap tilted back, leaned forward, his eyes lingering on the scar that ran from her temple to her jaw. "Damn, what happened to your face? Looks like you got in a fight with a lawnmower and lost." His friends snickered, their grins sharp and unapologetic. Aisha's smile didn't falter, but her grip on the pen tightened. She was used to this, comments, questions, or outright mockery. People saw the scars and assumed they could say whatever they wanted, as if her pain was their entertainment. "Just coffee for now?" she asked, ignoring the jab. They ordered, still chuckling, and she turned to fetch their drinks, her heart steady despite the sting. She had heard worse. Behind the counter, she poured coffee into mismatched mugs, her movements practiced and precise. Her coworker, Maria, a wiry woman in her 50s, caught her eye and shook her head. "Don't let those boys get to you, Aisha. They're just dumb kids with nothing better to do." Aisha nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine," she said, though the words felt heavier than they should. She wasn't fine. Not entirely, but she had learned long ago to keep her feelings locked away, like the memories she carried from a war most of these people would never understand. As she delivered the coffee, the young men continued their banter, their voices low but not low enough. "Bet she got those scars from something stupid, like falling into a campfire," one said, loud enough for her to hear. Another laughed, adding, "Or maybe she's just clumsy with a knife." Aisha set the mugs down, her face a mask of professionalism, and walked away. She didn't owe them an explanation. She never did. Across the diner, a man sat alone at the counter, his broad shoulders hunched over a plate of eggs and toast. He was in his late 50s, his hair graying at the temples, his face weathered by years under the sun. His name was Daniel Harris, a retired Marine who had seen 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He came to Mel's every Tuesday, always ordering the same thing, always keeping to himself. His eyes, sharp and observant, followed Aisha as she moved through the diner, not with pity, but with a quiet curiosity. There was something about her, something in the way she carried herself, that felt familiar to him, though he couldn't place it. The young men's laughter grew louder, their comments more brazen. "Hey, sweetheart, you ever think about covering those scars up? Makeup's cheap, you know," one called out as Aisha refilled their cups. The diner went quiet for a moment, the other patrons glancing over, some uncomfortable, others pretending not to hear. Aisha's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice even. "You need anything else?" she asked, her tone clipped. Before the man could respond, Daniel's voice cut through the air, low and steady. "You boys got nothing better to do than harass a woman trying to do her job?" He didn't look up from his plate, but his words carried weight, like a command issued on a battlefield. The young men froze, their smirks fading. One of them muttered something under his breath, but none of them dared challenge the older man, whose presence seemed to fill the room despite his stillness. Aisha glanced at Daniel, her expression unreadable, and returned to the counter. She didn't need anyone to defend her. She had fought harder battles than this, but the gesture wasn't lost on her. As she wiped down the counter, she caught Daniel watching her again, his eyes lingering on her forearm, where a small, faded tattoo peeked out from under her sleeve. It was a simple design, a shield with crossed rifles and a number, 3/7, etched in black ink. Most people wouldn't notice it, or if they did, they wouldn't understand its meaning. But Daniel's gaze sharpened, and he set his fork down, his movements slow and deliberate. "You served with the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm, like he was confirming something he already suspected. Aisha froze, her hand stilling on the counter. She hadn't spoken about her time in the Marines in years, not since she left the service a decade ago. The tattoo, like her scars, was a relic of a life she kept buried. "How'd you know?" she asked, her voice cautious, her eyes meeting his. There was no judgment in his expression, only recognition, like he was seeing her for the first time. "Saw the ink," he said, nodding toward her arm. "I was with 1/5, 1st Marine Division. Iraq, 04 to 06. You were in Fallujah, weren't you?" His words weren't a question so much as a statement, spoken with the certainty of someone who had been there, who knew the weight of that place and time. Aisha's breath caught, but she nodded, her guard lowering just enough to let the conversation continue.
"Yeah.
Fallujah, 05. Second tour." She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Fallujah was a name that carried its own story, one of blood and fire and survival. The scars on her face and arms were from an IED that had torn through her Humvee, killing 2 of her squad mates and leaving her with wounds that took years to heal. The tattoo was a tribute to her unit, a reminder of the family she had lost and the battles she had fought. Daniel leaned forward, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "I knew a few guys from March 7th. Tough bastards. You were a combat medic, weren't you?" It was another statement, not a guess, and Aisha's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't told anyone in this town about her role, hadn't wanted the questions or the pity that came with it. "How'd you figure that?" she asked, her tone wary but curious. "The way you move," he said. "You're steady, focused, like you've had to keep your head in chaos. And that scar on your arm, it's from shrapnel, not some accident. I've seen wounds like that before." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "You saved lives out there, didn't you?" Aisha didn't answer right away. The memories were heavy, always lingering just beneath the surface. She could still hear the screams, the crack of gunfire, the desperate calls for "Doc," as she worked to stabilize the wounded under fire. She had saved lives, yes, but she had also lost so many. The weight of those losses was etched into her skin, her scars a testament to the cost of her service. Before she could respond, one of the young men at the booth called out again, his voice dripping with mockery. "Yo, what's with the tattoo? You trying to look tough or something?" His friends laughed, but the sound was cut short when Daniel stood, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His presence was enough to silence the room. "That tattoo," he said, his voice calm but carrying the authority of someone who had seen more than these boys ever would, "is from the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. It means she's been through hell and came out the other side. It means she's braver than any of you will ever be. So how about you show some damn respect?" The diner was silent now, every eye on Daniel and the young men, who shrank back in their seats. The one who had spoken looked away, his bravado gone. Aisha stood behind the counter, her heart pounding, torn between gratitude and discomfort. She didn't want to be the center of attention, didn't want her past dragged into the open like this. But Daniel's words had shifted something in the room, a quiet acknowledgement of her strength that she hadn't realized she needed. Daniel turned back to her, his expression softening. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," he said quietly. "But I couldn't let them talk to you like that. Not when I know what that tattoo means." Aisha nodded, her throat tight. "It's okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. The young men paid their bill and left without another word, their earlier arrogance replaced by a sheepish silence. The other patrons returned to their meals, but there was a subtle change in the air, a newfound respect in the glances they cast Aisha's way. She went about her work, refilling coffee and clearing plates, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying Daniel's words and the memories they had stirred. As closing time approached, Daniel lingered at the counter, nursing his coffee. Aisha hesitated, then approached him, wiping her hands on her apron. "Why'd you do that?" she asked, her voice low. "You didn't have to say anything." Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because I've been where you were," he said. "I know what it's like to carry scars, the kind people see and the kind they don't. And I know what it means to wear that tattoo. You're not just a waitress, Aisha. You're a Marine, and you deserve to be seen for that." For the first time that day, Aisha's eyes softened, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her guarded exterior. She had spent so long hiding her past, letting the scars define her in the eyes of others, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be recognized for who she was, not what she looked like. "You were in Fallujah too, weren't you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel nodded. "Yeah. First battle, 04. Lost a lot of good people." He paused, his gaze distant for a moment before returning to her. "But we kept going. Just like you did." They sat in silence for a moment, two veterans bound by shared experiences that no one else in the diner could understand. Aisha felt a weight lift, not entirely, but enough to make the day feel a little lighter. She wasn't alone, not anymore. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a regular at Mel's, always sitting at the counter, always ordering eggs and toast. He and Aisha talked when the diner was quiet, sharing stories of their time in the service, the good and the bad. He told her about the brothers he had lost, the missions that still haunted him. She told him about the IED, the surgeries, the years of trying to rebuild a life after the war. They didn't need to explain the details. They understood each other in a way that didn't require words. The other patrons noticed the change in Aisha. She still moved with the same steady grace, but there was a new confidence in her step, a quiet pride that hadn't been there before. The whispers about her scars faded, replaced by a respect that spread through the small town like ripples in a pond. The young men who had mocked her never returned, but others began to ask questions, not out of cruelty, but curiosity and admiration. Aisha didn't always answer, but when she did, her voice was steady, her words carrying the weight of her truth. One day, as Aisha cleared Daniel's plate, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pin, a Marine Corps emblem, worn but polished. He slid it across the counter to her. "Found this in my old gear," he said. "Thought you might want it." Aisha picked it up, her fingers tracing the familiar eagle, globe, and anchor. She hadn't worn anything like it since she left the service, hadn't thought she deserved to. But as she looked at Daniel, at the understanding in his eyes, she realized something. Her scars weren't just marks of pain. They were proof of her strength, her survival, her service. "Thanks," she said, pinning it to her apron. For the first time in years, she felt whole. Word by word, Aisha's story spread through the town, not as a tale of pity, but as one of resilience. The diner became a place where veterans gathered, not just to eat, but to share their stories, to find connection in a world that often felt too quick to judge. And Aisha, the quiet waitress with the scars and the unit tattoo, became a symbol of something greater, a reminder that courage isn't always loud, that some battles are fought in silence, and that the marks we carry tell stories worth hearing.